purpose, the AG report states, "The Attorney General has not filed criminal charges against any of the priests for the Diocese of Grand Rapids as a result of this investigation." The second point was to determine if the Michigan dioceses were complying with their statutory obligation to report the sexual abuse of minors. The Attorney General's report for Grand Rapids does not specifically address in its findings the topic of diocesan compliance. However, most of the allegations of abuse detailed in the report were turned over to local law enforcement, local prosecutors, or the Attorney General's office directly from the Diocese of Grand Rapids. The investigation into the Diocese of Grand Rapids did not reveal any allegations regarding priests in active ministry, and again, no criminal charges were filed as a result of this investigation. The Attorney General's office explains in its introduction to the report, "The allegations are summarized here, and their inclusion does not reflect a determination by the department that the allegations are credible or otherwise substantiated or indicative of a crime." During the 75-year period in the report, more than 1,000 priests have served in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. The report details the reported abuse of 152 victims by 51 priests. The vast majority of reported abuse cases in our diocese are very old, with the most occurring between 1970 and 1979. The AG report finds that almost 3/4 of the accused priests are known or presumed to be dead. For the clerics who are living, or presumed to be living, none are in active ministry in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. Of course, every instance in which a minor was abused is one too many. However, it's important to underscore that the report also provides details on consensual relationships between priests and adults. While these actions are immoral, they are not in violation of any Michigan law. Including and counting these adult relationships in the report inflates both the number of accused and the number of minor victim survivors of clerical sexual abuse. All alleged conduct involving a minor occurred before 2002, the year of the United States Conference Catholic Bishops enacting the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People. Finally, the AG report released today confirms that the Catholic Church's safeguards outlined in the Charter are working. I would now like to focus my remarks on two matters. First, the victim survivors of clergy abuse, and second, what the Catholic Church is doing to prevent abuse from happening again. First, in regard to victim survivors, I offer my deepest and most sincere apologies to the victim survivors of clerical abuse. I am sorry that a church leader in whom you placed your trust misused his power and abused you. Priests are ordained to serve in the person of Christ himself, which makes the sexual abuse of minors incomprehensible and particularly harmful. These men have broken a sacred trust. They have betrayed Christ and done violence to his beloved children. I would like to especially recognize and thank the victim survivors who have courageously come forward to share their stories. Your willingness to share about the harm caused to you is a testimony to your strength and your resilience. For those who have not come forward and still hold this pain deep in their heart, please know that we continue to pray for your healing and welcome you to come forward when you are ready. You deserve to be heard, and you deserve healing. We keep the victim survivors at the heart of our response and at the center of all of our actions. The diocese has a professional victim assistance coordinator who is available 24/7 to answer calls from survivors, arrange for counseling and support, and encourage victim survivors to report abuse to local law enforcement. The diocese also reports the abuse to law enforcement, and since the beginning of this investigation, to the Attorney General's office. I have met personally with individuals who reported experiencing sexual abuse by a priest. I can never fully understand the depth of their suffering or know what they still carry within them today. But I will continue to do my best to listen and to offer my prayers and my support. Once again, as a bishop of the Catholic Church, I apologize to every victim survivor who has been abused by anyone affiliated with the Catholic Church. Many of you suffered in silence and in darkness for years, and for that, I am truly sorry. Now, the second point, what is the Catholic Church doing to prevent abuse from happening again? And for this, I would like to refer to what we call the Charter. As I mentioned before, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops enacted the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People in 2002. The Charter is a set of strict protocols for handling and preventing clergy sexual abuse of minors. Let me detail a few of the protocols of the Diocese of Grand Rapids that have been in place for the last 20-plus years as part of the Charter. The diocese maintains a zero-tolerance policy. Anyone suspected of abusing a minor, child, or vulnerable adult is removed from public ministry until a civil and canonical investigation is complete. Every allegation, even those made against a deceased member of the clergy, and regardless how long ago the abuse allegedly occurred, is immediately reported to the appropriate civil authority. The diocese has a victim assistance coordinator who assists victim survivors in the healing process. Additionally, I have met personally and will continue to meet with victim survivors. Every allegation of sexual abuse of a minor is presented to our diocesan review board, even if criminal charges cannot be filed. The review board is comprised of a member of the clergy and 6 lay members, including a retired judge, a retired FBI agent, psychologists, and a social worker. The review board makes a recommendation to me regarding each case that's brought before them. The diocese adopted Virtus, a reputable children's protection program focused on the detection and prevention of sexual abuse. Anyone who will work with children must complete this training beforehand, along with a background check. Nearly 33,000 clergy, teachers, staff, and volunteers in our diocese have participated in this mandatory program since 2002. Additionally, the students in our schools participate in age-appropriate training to learn how to spot and report inappropriate behavior. Finally, the diocese takes our promise to protect seriously. To ensure that we retain top safe environment practices, the diocese has participated in and has passed annual child safety compliant audits conducted by Stonebridge Business Partners, an independent third party, every year since 2002, and we participated in and passed an audit just a few months ago in August. Today's report shows that the Church is not immune to the brokenness that we find in the human condition. We are not a perfect church, but we are committed to learning from our past. Again, I ask forgiveness for the sinful wrongdoings of priests named in this report who violated their sacred office, and for any way that church leadership did not live up to its weighty responsibilities to lead and protect. While I cannot undo the sins of the past, I can commit as bishop to continue to be open and honest on this matter. We well know that the vast majority of our priests, past and present, are good men who live out their priestly vocation with fidelity and dedication. For those priests who are listening to this press conference, know of my profound gratitude for your faithfulness and invaluable ministry. The Diocese of Grand Rapids remains committed to the promises made more than 20 years ago in response to the Charter. I thank our priests, our teachers, our laity for their vigilance in this important work of keeping our young Catholics safe. We will continue to work to ensure that victim survivors are heard and that they have what is needed for them to find healing and peace. To anyone who suffered clergy abuse and has not yet reached out, please share your story with the Office of the Attorney General, local civil authorities, or the Diocese of Grand Rapids Victim Assistance Coordinator. You deserve the opportunity for healing. Please join me in praying for all who have been impacted by this shameful chapter of the Church's past. May our continued actions ensure that we keep the most vulnerable among us safe and secure. Thank you very much. Annalise will now call on you for questions.
Ken Coker for Wood TV. I'm wondering, sir, of the 51 who've been named, how many of those actually were involved in the molestation of children? We had counted 14 at some point of those 51, but can you be more specific?
14 were involved in what? Children or adults?
Sexual assault of children. I'm wondering of the 51, what is you had said something about how they included adults.
There are, I think, 14 of the 51 who engaged in behavior with adults, so we can do the math on that.
With adults? With children?
14 out of 51.
With adults.
Okay. I'm Dee Morrison with WGBU Public Radio. There was some discussion about 2/3 of the priests that were accused are dead at this time, and the others are either not active in ministry in this diocese or retired. Do we know if any of them are active in ministry elsewhere?
I would say no, because any bishop who knows what he's doing, if you have a priest that comes into your diocese and wants to do ministry, you need a letter of good standing. As a matter of fact, for every funeral or baptism that you want to do in another diocese, you have to present a letter from your bishop that you are not a cause for concern, and there is nothing that would prevent you from ministering. So, not only do we have maybe retired priests, but every priest or deacon that wants to function in any diocese has to have, shall we say, a letter of good standing on file in the diocese where they want to minister.
Why doesn't the diocese keep a list of abusers, especially if a victim is looking for previous abusers, or they might think they're the only one? How could that help them if they don't have a list of abusers on your actual website or in the actual report?
I would say, first of all, let's remember that when the diocese does have knowledge of a priest who has abused, and it has been definitively established, that we do publish the names, and we have, I think the report mentions 15 that we've done. Most of the dioceses have lists, but what we find is that there are some very basic principles of the legal system that tend to be put into question when there is a list. One thing that the AG's report repeats over and over again is you're innocent until proven guilty. And so this is especially true in the case of priests who have died. You know, how are you able to maintain your good reputation if you're accused after you've died? Secondly, I think there's the non-retroactivity of the law. Oftentimes what we see is that people are applying today's legal climate to something that happened 75 years ago, when those actions were not either a violation under church law or state law. You have to be, so in other words, you're comparing apples and oranges in these cases. I think thirdly, I think that everybody is entitled to due process. And when we have lists that simply name people, I think that could be obscured. The other thing is, if you look at these lists from diocese to diocese, the criteria for getting on the list are very, very uneven and different. So it's not like if you look at one list in this diocese, we have 195 dioceses. If you look at one list in this diocese, one list in this diocese, even look at the lists in the state of Michigan, they don't have the same criteria for how you get on the list or how you're kept off the list. So, I mean, it's very, very, in a sense, in that way, each diocese has its own criteria for who gets on the list. And I think that, again, the right of defense is very important. So I think that this information can be helpful, but I don't think that there's a general right to know that would obscure the various legal principles that I've just articulated. And that is the reason why we did not have a list. I was waiting to see the Attorney General's report. And in the meantime, it's taken a long time for this to come. It's been 7 years. In the meantime, we've received some unofficial guidance, some opinions from the Holy See, even by Pope Francis and Pope Leo, that warn against having diocesan lists of priests. And so with that in mind, I would be very reluctant, without further knowledge, to have a list.
Two questions, if I may. When was the last credible allegation of sexual assault of a child that the diocese released? And I think as of early 2000s, the diocese has spent $1 million in settlements and counseling, and I'm wondering if you've got an updated number on how much it's spent.
I would say, first of all, that I think the last known case we have predates the 2002 charter, so I think it's 1999. And in terms of, I don't think that was covered in the report at all, in terms of how much money has been given out. And I don't know what the running tab is, for example, on counseling. I mean, that's one of the things that we are trying to do, is when we do know of victim survivors, we immediately offer them counseling services, and we continue them because we want them to heal. Now, I don't know, for example, how much that amounts to this year. We're coming to the end of 2025. I don't know what that is, but it's something that we are committed to doing, and so that would be, that would be my answer on that.
Our station has spoken with victims and accusers of the different priests. What would be your response to them who feel like their concerns weren't taken seriously when they came forward, and why weren't any actions taken sooner?
Well, from my perspective, I want to say that when I became bishop in 2013, I found a very, very fine, safe environment protection plan in place that Bishop Hurley had put in place. And as I mentioned in my remarks, that we do have a victims assistance coordinator who is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We've had very fine VACs, as they're called, over the years. And I think they've been very compassionate in dealing with those who reach out to them. When we do get any kind of a report, any kind of an allegation, we immediately report it to the civil authorities, and since the investigation of 2018, to the Department of the Attorney General. So we make sure that it's known. When certain cases are underway, you have to remember that we are asked, the church is asked not to begin any kind of investigations so as not to get in the way of the civil authorities investigating themselves. So we wait. I think that we do I don't, I mean, every victim is individual. Everybody has their own experience. But from my perspective, I think the people that we have in place, our Safe Environment Coordinator, our Victim Assistance Coordinator, I do believe that they are compassionate and that they are willing to do whatever they can for those who reach out to them. So that would be my answer to your question.
Final question.
Have you read the entire report, and do you have any issues with the AG's findings or even the fact that they issued the report?
Well, how many questions is that? 3?
Yes, like 3. She said one last.
What's the first one?
Well, have you read the report? And if so, do you have any issues with what was included?
There are certain sections of the report I read very, very carefully, and others less carefully. Every report is important because it reflects the experience of someone who has allegedly been abused, and so that would be, I have I think a decent familiarity. I can't go into the weeds on it with detail. And your second question was what?
Do you have any issues with the fact that they released it and with anything in that report?
Well, one of the things that I would wonder about, if you look at what the intended purposes of the report were, to investigate whether criminal charges could be filed against those who engage in potentially criminal conduct. I'm not real sure why we have dead people in the report. You cannot file charges against people who are deceased. So that is one thing that I'm thinking about, The other would be, it seems like the report wants to ensure, and this is exactly the words from the AG's report, it's our intention to ensure that any past failure to report sexual abuse will never happen again. And I wish they would have had a clearer statement on that. I mean, we've got, what have they said? They've said that they have said in the report that the Grand Rapids Diocese has fully cooperated with the investigation. They've also stated in the report does not suggest the diocese has additional information that has not been provided. So, I mean, that's about as close as we get to addressing the second purpose of the report. And I take that as very positive. So, I mean, there are some very positive aspects to this report. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a downer. In other words, what we've done in the past 20 years, I think, has shown that we're getting better at providing our young people. And I think it also shows that we're learning, with every audit report we have, with every thing that we're trying to do to make sure that our clergy, our employees, and our children can recognize, red flags about abuse and get adequate training. I think the fact that we have 33,000 people who have undergone that training is a very positive thing. And so there are some very positive aspects. I think the other thing that the report does is it does offer support to those who were willing to come forward. Now, a lot of what was in the report was provided by the diocese, but there were 105 calls on the tip line. And so I think that the whole initiative has had some very, very helpful results.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you have been listening to a press conference by the Grand Rapids Catholic Diocese in response to a report from the Attorney General's office looking into the abuse in the clergy. Bishop Okoviak called it detailed and troubling. The diocese is cooperating, and he said this is an opportunity to do better. 51 priests were investigated in this report since 2018. 37 of them are now dead, and none of those alive are active ministry in Grand Rapids Diocese. Now, 152 victims are accusing 51 of those priests. The bishop there said the vast majority of those are very old, between 1970 and 1979. Now, he did offer apologies to victims and families and said this is a way to look at how the church is going to prevent this from happening again. He pointed to a 20-year-old charter protocol that has zero tolerance for abuse of children or vulnerable adults. We're going to have a lot more about this today, starting at 5 o'clock on air and on our website, 13onyourside.com. But if you have any information about the Catholic Church that you think could help the Attorney General's office, you can call the investigation hotline. You can also submit an anonymous tip on the Attorney General's website. That phone number for the hotline right there on your screen. Once again, we'll have more on this coming up later today on air and online on 13onyourside.com.